Hi, it's Pascal. Today I'm going to take you through my 5 iconic snare sound mixes, part 2. So we're going to start with Rush, and the principle is going to be the same for all of the 5 mixes. I'm only going to talk about the snare. So up top I have the original song and the playback, and then the drum mics. So we used more or less the same thing for everything. In this case we have 2 overheads and a hi-hat, and then we have a snare top and a snare bottom, and then kick and room mics. So very simple. The snare top in this case has a couple plugins on it, and it is also being sent to the reverb channel that I made. So first let's listen to the snare top mic dry. First thing I did was flip the phase to match the overheads, and then I have an EQ on it. As you can see, here's the fundamental. I'm cutting right below that. Here I'm taking out one resonance frequency at 370 Hz, minus 12.5 dB. I want to get rid of that frequency altogether. Same thing goes for 635, minus 8.4 dB. And I'm also boosting 5.4K at roughly 5 dB for some more, for a brighter attack and also some snare wire sound. So we go from this to this. The next plugin I have is distortion, and I'm using that to simulate some of the tape saturation that's in the original. So I'm using 9.5 dB of drive, adjusting the output gain in such a way that the overall volume stays the same. And then I also have a high cut at 6.6K. Then I have an enveloper. So the attack time is 18.5 milliseconds, and I'm actually removing some of the attack because the snare is sounding too explosion-like. I want it to be a softer sound, just like in the original. So I'm using this to get rid of the attack a little bit. So it's kind of the opposite as what a compressor might do. A compressor might add some attack. Here I'm taking some out. And then one last EQ. Another low cut, because the distortion plugin added some lows. As you can see, all of this is coming just from the distortion plugin, and I don't want it, so I'm cutting it off. Then I'm boosting the fundamental slightly, and also some more highs around the attack and snare wire region at roughly 6K, 4 dB. The snare bottom is very standard for snare bottom. It sounds dry like this. And with the EQ, I'm just getting the snare wires. So I'm doing a low cut at roughly 4.5K and also a high cut at 10.6K, because I don't want the snare wires to have such a harsh high sound. I want them to be just the wires and then nothing else. Together with the top mic. And then I'm sending them at the same level into this reverb bus. So this is what the reverb receives. Then I have the chroma verb plugin on it. The room setting, this is all untouched. And I just put the decay to 1.9 seconds. Dry is down, wet is up. And then I also have a high cut at 10.4K. The reverb on its own sounds like this. And then this EQ is boosting some 6K 3 dB. So let's listen to the drum mix without the reverb first. Where is this coming from? And then the drum bus has some more distortion on it for some tape simulation, and then a low cut because of the distortion, which adds artificial low end. So the whole mix sounds like this. Then the overheads with the snare. And this is what it sounds like in the room.
The daytime Sawyer, he gets high on you, and the space he invades, he gets by on you.
So let's quickly look at the fundamental.
Sawyer, he gets high on you.
So the original fundamental is sitting here.
The daytime Sawyer, he gets high on you, and the space he invades, he gets by on you.
And mine is also sitting here. So pretty simple mix, just a lot of reverb and some warmth in the sound coming from the distortion and the transients being cut off slightly. So the layout of the session is the same as before, so I'm not going to talk about that anymore. We'll just focus on snare. As you can see, I have obviously a snare top microphone and a snare bottom microphone. I'm also sending both of them into a reverb plugin. And also the room mic, which is muted, is going into the reverb plugin. But then I also have this channel called Sticky Glue, and it is basically a doubled snare top track, which I just treated differently. If I can find, yeah. As you can see, it's the exact same thing as the snare top. I just used it in the mix differently. And then we have the drum bus, obviously with a slight EQ on it. I'm boosting some highs. So let's start by looking at the snare top mic, dry. So the first thing is a gate. I have the attack dialed all the way down, hold is at 70 and release at 112.5 milliseconds. So I'm isolating just the backbeats. Here I am flipping the phase to match the overheads, and then we have the first EQ. So as you can see, this is the fundamental, which is very, very loud compared to the other frequencies. So I'm taking some of that out. I'm cutting below that. Also removing some more low mids here and also one resonance frequency. And I'm adding a lot of 6K 5 dB. Then I'm compressing. So I'm using the Platinum Digital compressor at 1.9 to 1 ratio, which is not very strong, just slight compression. 60 milliseconds and 210 for attack and release. So just a little bit of compression. Another EQ, which is again removing low frequencies, fundamental and low mids, adding highs, this time at 7.2K. Then we have a chroma verb plugin, which has a decay of 1.1 seconds. I'm keeping all of the dry signal. I'm adding 48% of wet signal. And I have a high cut here on the details setting at 10.4K. Then I have some distortion. Again, tape simulation. 10 dB of drive, and this adjusted accordingly to keep the volume the same. So this gives me some, it crushes the signal, which also compresses it. Yeah. All right, then we're going into the reverb send. Next up, we have the snare bottom first. Let's start with that. So the snare bottom on its own sounds like this. First thing I'm doing is doing a low cut at 4.3K to get rid of everything but the snare wires. And this is my starting point. Then I'm using the enveloper, dialing back the attack 92 milliseconds by 90%. So I'm basically taking all the attack away and I just want the sustain of the wires. I'm also taking up the release knob 42% in gain, and I'm also having the release set relatively long at 230 milliseconds. So it sounds almost like reverb already. Then I have another EQ, which is boosting at 6.4K, 3.5 dB. With the top mic. All right, if we listen to this though, you'll notice that the snare so far is lacking two things. One being the reverb, which we'll come to in a minute. But then there is also around 6,000 hertz. There is this very sticky sounding, tape sample based whatever, information floating around, which I'm still lacking. And I figured I could probably get that from the top mic. So like I said, I doubled the track, and then I'm also processing that differently. The first thing on this channel strip is a gate, which I'm using, and I'm also sidechaining it. It's being opened by the snare top mic, which is this one. Then I have a gain plugin, again flipping the phase to match the overheads, and then I have an EQ. And what this does is cutting everything below 7.8K and everything above 9.3K. And here I'm also removing a very specific frequency at 12.8K minus 11 dB, which was present, and I didn't like it. So it's living in this region right here. Then again, some distortion as tape simulation, 23.5 dB of drive. Another EQ. This one is set flat, just the gain is up 11.5 dB. And then I have an enveloper again. I'm dialing back the attack all the way at 53 milliseconds. And I'm also dialing back the release by 64%, 250 milliseconds. So I'm thinking of this as kind of a layer for the snare top mic. Almost sounds like a lighter or sandpaper. Another EQ then is removing some more highs. Everything above 11K is removed. So let's listen to the mix without the reverb and without the sticky glue signal, and then with it. So as you can hear, this is a very important element to getting the right sound in this case. Then I'm also sending at the same level all of these three snare mics to the reverb channel. So let's listen to what that is receiving. First I'm gating it to get just the snare. Then I have a reverb plugin on it. The dry knob is dialed all the way back, the wet all the way up. Room setting, I'm taking away 4K and I'm adding in 7K. And this EQ is showing in what region the reverb is being produced. So I'm not adding or cutting certain frequencies of a given reverb, but this is really designing the reverb that I can then treat. Also here, I'm boosting the fundamental of the drum, and I'm also boosting some more highs at 6K and rolling off everything above 12K. So we have the reverb sounding without the reverb like this, and with it. And this EQ seems to be off. Okay. Might as well remove it. So here we have the whole mix without the reverb. All right. This time we're looking at just the snare top and bottom mic, as well as overheads. I also have a room mic here in the session, but it's off. I have a reverb, which the snare top and bottom are being sent to at the same level. So let's turn that off for now and listen to just the snare top mic by itself. And by the way, I'm also flipping the phase on the snare top mic. So a very high and open sound. First EQ is cutting below the fundamental, removing one resonance frequency. Ooh. Also boosting slightly at 760 Hertz, 1.3 dB, and I'm also boosting at 7.3K, roughly 5 dB to give more presence to the sound. Then the compressor. It is set to 5:1 ratio, which is rather heavy compression. 19 milliseconds of attack and 64 of release. So the compressor releases very fast, and that allows the overtones and the ringing of the snare to be present. As you can hear with the compressor, the ringing is more present, the attack is a bit lower in volume, and it becomes more of an even sound, more balanced, or more present with the overtones at least. Another EQ is then removing 254 Hertz and also 430. So this is the fundamental, and this is some lower overtones. And then I have an enveloper, which is just adding a very slight amount of release, so 160 milliseconds and 22%. As you can hear, the hi-hat also becomes louder as the sound rings out, obviously, because the volume is being raised. But I think at this level it is okay, you don't really notice it in the whole mix. But the ringing becomes more present, which is important. Next up, snare bottom. A lot of junk in this sound, a lot of overtones, but I'm removing everything with this low cut at 3.6K. I'm getting just a very broad, kind of neutral sounding snare wire, which together with the top mic sounds like this. Also, let's quickly turn on the compression on the drum bus. So it's really not acting that much. It's just barely moving the needle. And then I have a reverb send, which both of these mics are going into. So I have the Chromaverb plugin. Size is at 64%, density at 78, distance at 59. I played around with those knobs a couple of times and settled for this. Dry signal is off, wet signal is all the way in. Decay is at 1.1 seconds. And I'm also doing a high cut at 10.4K. So here's the drum mix without the reverb. And with it.
I think you better quit talking that shit. It's just one of those days, feeling like a freight train. First one to complain, leaves with the bloodstain. Damn right, I'm a maniac. You better watch your back, cause I'm fucking up your program.
Alright, so pretty simple sound, just very high snare tuning. In this case, we have 3 microphones, or rather 3 snare tracks, but I actually doubled the snare top track once. So the snare top and snare top sustain tracks you see here are the same original recording, just mixed in a different way. So first, let's listen to the snare top mic on its own without reverb. First, I'm flipping the phase. So I think it sounds very good. It's very pretty sound. It has a lot of body. I'm boosting the fundamental slightly at 1.4 dB, cutting below that, moving some mids, some resonance, and then I'm adding highs at 7.2K, 6 dB. Then I'm compressing it. this makes the sound more compact. 90 milliseconds of attack and 160 of release. 3.6 to 1 ratio. So just a very open, very good sounding snare top signal, in my opinion. I'm then sending that, as well as the bottom, just a little more to the reverb channel. Snare bottom sounds like this. The first EQ I'm doing is cutting everything below the snare wires. I'm boosting at 7.85K, 5.6 dB, and then cutting above 11.4K, so I'm getting just the wires. And then I have an enveloper on it, which is taking out all of the attack up to 95 milliseconds. And I'm then boosting the sustain, the release, at 38%. And the length is 230 milliseconds. So I'm creating a sound which has no attack and is quite long. So it almost sounds like reverb. Alright, then we have the send, and then lastly we have the snare top sustain mic, which I'm using just for sustain. But since it's the top mic doubled, I'm also flipping the phase on it. And then I'm cutting everything below 330 Hertz. I'm also cutting at roughly 500, minus 8.6 dB. Because as you can see, this is a peak here in the frequency spectrum and I don't want it, so I'm cutting it. So that's now the same level. And then I'm also cutting everything above 3K. So I'm getting just the portion of the sound that has the sustain in it. Then I'm using the enveloper once again to cut out all of the attack up to 35 milliseconds and then boost the release, the sustain part of the sound, 36% up to 390 milliseconds. And you'll see in a minute why I did that. Then compressing that with the classic VCA compressor, which I usually use to slam things and to really compress very extremely. In this case, 6.1 to 1 ratio. And then I have an EQ on it, which is removing one resonance frequency and also some of this 800 stuff. So 785 Hertz minus 6.1 dB. So some less overtones. So here's the drum mix without reverb and without the sustain mic. And with it. And now for the reverb. This is the signal which will trigger the reverb plugin. So mostly snare wires. The size is up to 100%, density at 60, distance at 50, and the decay is 1.8 seconds long. I'm keeping only the wet signal. And I'm also not cutting or boosting anything with the EQ, it's set flat. And then I'm adding some more highs with another EQ at 6.1K, 3.5 dB. So let's listen to the drum mix without the reverb. And with it. On the drum bus, I'm also adding some more compression as well as some highs, and I'm also cutting some mids, which makes me end up with this.
The movie stars, every good gold digger's gonna wind up there. Every playboy bunny with a bleached blonde hair. And well, hey, hey, I wanna be a rock star. The movie stars, every good star. Hey, hey.
So as you can hear, the sustain is very, very present in this mix, as well as the reverb. I don't know if they used samples or just compressed the heck out of the recordings they made. But I think with this sustain track here, I can get pretty close. Here we have the session. A couple of things are special. The room mic is off and the snare bottom mic is off, which is very unusual. But the snare sound is so mid-rangey and so undefined that a snare bottom mic would just make it sound too good. Let's listen to the snare top mic. First thing I'm doing is flipping the phase to match the overheads, and then I have an EQ, which is kind of lowering the fundamental slightly, cutting below it, and then here I'm adding a resonance. Then I'm cutting 2 more overtones. I'm then compressing the sound with the vintage VCA compressor. Ratio is set to 2.91, 19 milliseconds of attack and 240 of release. And then I'm adding another EQ. This time I'm boosting even more of this resonance frequency at 316 Hz. I'm cutting an overtone just above that at 336 Hz. I'm also cutting broadly this region around 470 minus 4.3 dB. And then I'm also removing some highs to remove some of the attack and some of the snare wires, because the original sound is so mid-rangey. So I'm doing a high shelf cut at 1.6K minus 5.6 dB, and also a very wide cut at 2.7K minus 4.2 dB. So let's see what we have. I'm then compressing the drum bus with the same compressor, 2.91, 17.5 milliseconds of attack and 180 of release. And then I'm doing some more EQ to get rid of some of the 1.4K region, minus 3 dB. So let's listen with the playback and then compare to the original. I think it's fascinating how low the snare is in the mix in the original too. It has no reverb, it almost has no snare wires. It's as if they took any drum out of the shelf and then they put it there and they mic'd it and they took the sound as it was. It doesn't sound very good to me, but it's yeah, very special and very widely known for being special. So, and it works inside of the mix. So that's all that counts, I think. So yeah, that was quick. I think that does it for this video. And all of the mixes that I made for our 5 iconic drum sounds part 2 video. So I hope you learned something, and I hope to see you next time. Take care.